Welcome and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Colin Barrows with Cactus to Cloud Institute, and I'm joined here with the wonderful co-instructors, lead instructors. I don't know if we've kind of figured out the titles yet, maybe, but for the course, Katie Barrows and Tamara Hedges, who both have a ton of experience. Both as climate steward instructors. Tamara, like, is originally responsible for this course existing pretty much in the Coachella Valley, at least. And so we're really pleased to have both of them and be able to learn from both of them. Um, I'll be the one who mostly sends you emails and Zoom links and calendar invites and all that kind of stuff in the class. Claudia was in the California Naturalist class most recently, so she knows how that works. But kind of the same deal. And I think we'll jump into a few slides, informational slides about the course, and then have opportunity for everybody to answer questions, ask questions, and have them answered. I'm going to share my screen here. So this is the Desert Sands and Sky Islands Climate Stewards 2026 info session, not to be confused with the Desert Sands and Sky Islands California Naturalist um, course and info session, and we'll talk a little bit about the difference between the two courses because they are related. We call them both Desert Sands and Sky Islands courses, but they are different. So we'll get into that as part of our information tonight. I'll just, I guess Tamara, since I kind of mentioned that Tamara is here in this photo from the original California Naturalist class that was taught here in the Coachella Valley back in 2018. And I kind of add this photo by way of introduction because I am there in the back as both a graduate of the California Naturals course and then later the Climate Stewards course, and also an instructor. I which actually helped teach the first California Naturals class too, the part about iNaturalist, and been involved ever since, some way or another. Um, the these classes were originally sort of housed or administered by the University of California Palm Desert Center, and since they don't have the capacity to do that anymore, they're now administered by Cactus to Cloud Institute. A little bit about us at Cactus to Cloud. We're a nonprofit based in the Coachella Valley. We're dedicated to um, resilience and inclusion in our desert, and especially thinking about not just people or just plants and animals, but thinking about the relationships between them. So this Desert Sands and Sky Islands is one of our kind of main programs. You may have also heard about our work to advocate for the designation of Chuckwalla National Monument and protection of public lands, especially over the last year and a half or so. I'm sure if you do take the course, or now that we know each other, you'll be hearing from me about both of those things. Um, but I kind of put this slide up here as a uh, again to introduce us. You know, we're a small team. This really 4 or 5 people at the most, and only 2 staff members, one of which would be me. So we are able to be successful through partnerships, through coalitions and things like that. So there's a collection of some of our coalitions and partnerships, and the big one that we'll be talking about today is our partnership with the University of California um, Department of Agriculture and Natural Resources, UC and then their UC Environmental Stewards program. So UC Environmental Stewards is a program within UC A&R, and underneath the UC Environmental Stewards, you have both the California Naturalist and the Climate Stewards program. And I think this is the last slide that I get to talk about. Um, so I just want to use this as a opportunity to introduce you to our co-instructor for the course, Katie Barrows, who you might guess is related to me. She's my mom.
Actually, Carl, maybe stay on that slide so that I want to step back and take a moment for Tamara to introduce herself. Tamara, as Colin mentioned, is very much responsible for the Environmental Stewards program, both naturalists, California naturalists and climate stewards being offered in the Coachella Valley. So Tamara, do you want to introduce yourself and
Sure.
tell us how wonderful you are?
I'm really embarrassed right now uh, but thank you, Katie and Colin. Yes, I was the executive director at UCR, University of California, Riverside Palm Desert Center for many years, and started in 2008 or 18, as Colin said, the California Naturalist Program, along with another Barrows, who is not on this call, Cameron Barrows, who retired just a year before I did, I think a year, maybe two. I retired in 2023. But I was really excited to work with Cameron to bring the Naturalist program, and then with the climate stewards, we were one of the the test sites for the climate steward program in 2020. We were all ready to go, and then COVID hit. So, but we did not falter. We kept going with the program in 2020, and we did it all online, and it was really a lot of fun and successful, something great to be doing during that time. If you remember, 2020 kept us thinking about things other than being inside and afraid to touch our groceries. So since then, we've kept both programs going. Really, really happy about the partnership that we have with Cactus to Clouds. It seems like this was just the organic path with the stars aligning to transition to Cactus to Clouds. And happy to be here, happy to still be involved with the program. I am both a California naturalist and a climate steward, and a big advocate of education, particularly these kinds of community access programs. So happy to be here. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Tamara. So my name is Katie Barrows, and I'm the co-instructor. Actually, we transitioned the climate stewards, I think, from Dr. Barrows and Tamara, and I joined the team in 2023 after I retired. I worked for many years in conservation and habitat issues and various environmental programs. I was actually the associate director of the Coachella Valley Mountains Conservancy when it first got started in the valley. And then I transitioned. I worked at Coachella Valley Association of Governments and the Coachella Valley Conservation Commission as the Director of Environmental Resources for, I think, 13 years. And unfortunately, in that position, I had the opportunity to work on both sides of my passion, which is habitat conservation and wildlife, and also issues surrounding sustainability, passion for doing everything we can with respect to protecting the earth. So we're very excited to have the class. This is actually, we had a little break, as Colin mentioned, in 2025, and we're happy to be offering the Climate Stewards class again this year. So let's go ahead with the next slide. And I guess if we have folks join as we go along, I might just pause briefly to welcome anybody else who joins. So just so you're aware, we appreciate you all being here. So this class is based on a program that was initiated by University of California out of the UC Davis campus. And they started with, as Tamara mentioned, the California Naturalist class and later Climate Stewards. So these are both programs and classes that are taught throughout the state by various organizations, most cases by nonprofits like Cactus to Cloud that work to provide these programs in different locations. And obviously the California Naturalist class here is very much focused on the desert. And for the Climate Stewards, we will also be focusing on our local community. But they're tremendous programs that really focus not just on certainly on an educational element, but really in a tremendous amount we want to help to build a community. We have a lot of different things we'll do as a follow-up to this course that kind of keeps us working together. So it's very much focused on that engagement, advocacy, and ways that we can build community around the issues of our natural environment and climate issues. Next slide. And so I think this one is an easy one when we think about the climate here in the desert during the summer months. I've been here for 40 years and certainly seen, we were just talking the other day about, the rainstorms and the freezing temperatures that we used to get. So we're not just talking about something in the future. I think we all can recognize that climate change is here and we are facing some challenges and some opportunities as a result. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned, I think this course, we really want to focus not just on you learning about climate science and what's going on with climate change, but on what we can do as individuals and even more so what we can do if we work together. These are just some examples of some of the things we're going to be talking about in the course, everything from electric vehicles and ways to have cleaner transportation, renewable energy, wind turbines. Of course, we happen to be one of the centers of wind energy, at least in the state of California. We'll spend a lot of time talking about food resources and the impacts of a lot of the food production approaches that we have on climate, but also what are, we know, for example, we waste a lot of food as a society. So we're looking at that. And then opportunities and some of the kinds of things that are being done in the Coachella Valley, like the CV Link project, which has created an opportunity and a way for people to have transportation on bicycles or on foot in a cross-valley program. So we'll be really looking at what are some of the things that are going on here in the Coachella Valley that would help to mitigate climate change. Next slide, please. We will be having some time spent. I want to emphasize you don't have to be a physics major or have taken a lot of chemistry to take this course. We do spend some time talking about climate science and what's actually going on with the impacts of greenhouse gases. It's probably definitely a very important baseline, but not something that we want to get too intense, and we recognize that some of that can get a little bit depressing, but this really is a nice graphic that gives a kind of a simple explanation. As you may be aware, we are fortunate on the planet Earth to have a layer of greenhouse gases, what's called the greenhouse effect, which is responsible for maintaining our temperature at a relatively constant, not fluctuating wildly as it might if there wasn't that greenhouse layer. And so obviously the greenhouse gases, including carbon dioxide, have built up around our atmosphere to create a situation where heat is re-radiated from the Earth's surface and gets trapped. And like I say, does maintain the Earth's temperature. Unfortunately, as I'm sure you're aware, the increase in greenhouse gases, including carbon dioxide and methane, have resulted in a much more intense heat trapping effect in the atmosphere. And that's really where what we had been mostly calling global warming, now we're calling climate change, because while warming is definitely one of the major trends, it's not the only impact of that changing climate. Next slide, please. And this is probably one of the few times you'll see a graph like this, but it's kind of helpful to be able to see some of this data that is what has helped scientists to really understand the effects and what's going on with climate change. So what we're looking at here is years going back 800,000 years with the carbon dioxide level in parts per million, which, as you can see here, increased rather dramatically and from a pattern of fluctuating pretty significantly, but nevertheless not going below or above, a certain amount, 300 parts per million. In 1911 and later in 1958, scientists were able to identify the amount of carbon that was increasing in the other greenhouse gases. And this shows you initially using ice core data and more recently with much more sophisticated instruments. So we know that climate change is happening, it's upon us, and what we're really faced with in many ways is what do we do to build resilience. Next slide, please. Here's another one that gives a more local example of what's going on with the climate. And similarly here, we're looking at actually the effect of that increase in carbon dioxide, which results in increased temperatures, warming. And this shows you going back, there's 1970 right here. So we're talking about right around mid 70s, 80s, 90s, when the increase in temperature became much more prominent. And of course, all of us living here in the desert or in the Inland Empire, wherever, are aware of the increasing temperature. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we want to look at is what does that mean to the Coachella Valley and the desert region? This is actually based on a study that was done for the Convention and Visitors Bureau some years back, where they took a look at what does it mean if we've got now what used to be relatively hot in May, but not as hot. September is when we thought fall came along. Now it's October. Not only is the increase in temperature occurring, but the season of our intense heat is much longer. So what does that mean to our tourist-based economy with events like Coachella and of course the Living Desert? And actually found that there was a pretty significant impact to the tourist economy in terms of the economic benefits to the valley, not to mention other aspects in terms of health. Next slide, please. And then we will obviously look at, well, what are the impacts of climate change on humans, on people? I know one of my favorite things to blame on climate change is not favorite, but the presence of mosquitoes. Like I say, I've been here 40 years and we didn't used to have mosquitoes much at all. But as we've seen, in particular, warmer night temperatures, I think that some of these insect-borne diseases may become more common. And I know for many of us, having mosquitoes around, like in the evening, it's just become a whole different situation than it was years past. Next slide, please. Another focus of our conversations will be on environmental justice and what are the impacts. Impacts of climate are not necessarily equal across the board in terms of our community. We have a really great presentation that we get from HARC that talks about some of the issues that they have identified in looking at the environmental impacts across the valley. So that's a topic that we'll spend some time on. Next slide, please. And one of the other big focuses of this course is to help you to not only have, like a basic understanding of climate change and what that means and what are some of the impacts, but how can we help to communicate that to others, and what are the ways in which we might be able to advocate for things in our community that would address climate resilience, for example. These are some maps that are put out by the Yale Climate Change Communications Project, and it's pretty interesting to take a look at these. This is actually one of the exercises that we'll do in the class, where you can ask different questions like, how many people think global warming is happening? And you can do this by this particular map shows it by state. So for the state of California, the higher, the more brown or red colors would show that more people think global warming or climate change is happening. It on average, on a national average, is about 69% as of 2025. Next slide, please. And there's a lot of different examples of that. How many people think that global warming will harm plants and animals, either a moderate amount or a great deal? That's also almost 70% on a national basis. And you can see there's some variability depending on where you are across the country. These folks over here that are subject to sea level rise maybe are a little bit more aware. Next slide, please. Also, whether it will harm future generations, either a great deal or a moderate amount, similarly, almost 70% on a national basis. Next slide, please. And then I think this one's really interesting to me. So then we say, well, what about what the effect will be on you personally? And even in 2025, after we've had record temperatures in the last couple of years, about 44%, less than half, almost less than half of the other percentages think that climate change will harm them personally. So these are, I think, some of the data that are really helpful and kind of easy to get to that help us to appreciate kind of where people are with respect to climate issues. Next slide, please. So this is kind of some of the guiding principles, if you will, of the Climate Stewards program. It's really focused on very much science-based. That's much like the California Naturalist class. It's really intended not to just talk about the science of climate issues, but the emotional, the mind-body aspects of it, because for many of us, watching some of the changes in our environment, some of the events like fires and floods and so on, that are an effect not just in terms of the science. So we're really looking at what are some of the needs of the community and how can we take a look at the social and ecological justice issues with respect to climate, and also encouraging participation. We are really, I would say, action and advocacy oriented in many ways. And in particular, this program does focus, as I mentioned, on building what's called communities of practice. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. Next slide, please. So these are some of the key themes: community and ecosystem resilience. How do we build standards in our community, like creating more shade that would help us to cope with the changing climate? What kinds of community level solutions there are? What are some of the human relationships? This program is very much also focused on the rest of the inhabitants of the planet besides humans, the wildlife and the organisms that live in the oceans and on the surface of the earth that are also seriously affected. Social and emotional learning, some of the actually trauma related aspects of climate change, and other ways of really, I think, taking this knowledge of the science and helping that become more something that we can communicate on a community basis. Next slide, please. So some of the other aspects, one of the things that we've learned in the desert, for example, with research done out of UC Riverside and Emeritus Professor Dr. Mike Allen. This is actually based on research done at several of our University of California research stations up in Idlewild at the James Reserve and in the Deep Canyon Reserve right here in Palm Desert. But this research has demonstrated the importance of desert natural areas in terms of sequestering or storing carbon dioxide in the soil in a form that it is not being released into the atmosphere and aggravating the climate issues. And they've done a lot of research with some high-tech mechanisms that are using cameras and ways to see what's going on. And what happens in deserts is the roots of desert plants tend to go very deep. And in that manner, they are actually bringing carbon down into the soil and holding it there. So this is a pretty amazing set of research, and it has resulted in an understanding on a statewide basis where deserts aren't necessarily the most appreciated habitat, that about 10% of this carbon sequestration or carbon storage in the state occurs in deserts. And that's pretty significant when you think about the entire state of California. Next slide, please. Some of the other things, we really want to get into some of that practical aspects. What are things that we as individuals can do or as communities, and gardening for pollinators, encouraging more pollinators, using native plants is one way that we can have an effect and also find enjoyment with having native plants and butterflies and hummingbirds and all of these different critters hanging out in our yard. Next slide, please. We'll talk about some different examples of habitat of native plant landscaping versus maybe desert landscaping, but one that has a little bit more structure to it, and ways in which we can actually enhance the ability for wildlife to manage in the changing climate by offering, shade and water and habitat like a lot of rocks for wildlife habitat and native plant landscaping. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, food is a really big issue. This is meant to make us all hungry and wanting to run off and get our dinner. But food, not only in terms of the way we grow food and what the impact is, one of our field trips will be looking what we call the farm tour, which is really a great opportunity to find out what's going on in our local community, both in the organic farms and also a more traditional farm. But not only just the way we grow food, but the level of food waste that occurs. And of course, the focus more and more on a plant-based diet. We have Tamara, who's got expert vegan, knows everything about vegan cooking, and one of our part of one of our field trips will be a visit to a vegan restaurant. So this is a really important aspect, and one that really actually makes the change in diet can have a very significant impact in terms of reducing the impacts on our climate. Next slide, please. So in addition to in online, the course is online, like we mentioned here, but we also have a lot of field trips, and these are some photographs, some past field trips. We went to a field trip that's really pretty interesting to the wastewater treatment plant in Palm Springs to see how our water gets cleaned to a point where it actually is then used to water parks and golf courses. As I mentioned, we visited the Tamalpais Organic Farm with this amazing vegetables that they're growing, composting projects in different parts of the valley. One of the farm research stations that the University of California operates. So we have a whole range of really interesting field trips. Next slide, please. And these are the components of the course. This class is hybrid in that part of it, the main lectures and discussions are online, which makes sense in terms of keeping us all from driving in our cars. And then there's another part which is in person, which is the field trips. We have 3 in-person field trips through the course of the class. About 50% of the class involves material that is in a program called Canvas, which some of you who are students may be familiar with. It's a widely used program in universities and colleges, but it's actually a sort of a study course that involves reading modules and answering questions and doing different exercises, which I think will really enrich. There's some deep dive opportunities, really a great place to learn a lot more and kind of go as deep as you would like. And so there's also a stewardship project, which is a community project that we encourage you to work in pairs or in groups. But this stewardship project is one of the requirements in order to receive a certificate for the Climate Stewards course. And we'll just talk a little bit more of that in just a moment. Next slide, please. So again, these are the course components. There's a series of online modules that you would accomplish working on your own. In addition to the Saturday meetings, we will have some Wednesday evening, like course, what do I want to say? Office hours, where if you have questions, and we'll be providing a lot of support for you and helping you learn the Canvas material, the online modules. And there's some just really interesting information there. And a lot of it involves, communicating with your fellow classmates about, some of the thoughts that you might have by learning about different parts of the program. The regular course meetings will be, the bulk of the learning material is in these online modules, and it is a requirement in order to receive the Climate Steward certificate. Next slide, please. So course requirements, and just to make sure you're all aware of the different elements of the courses to complete the Canvas materials. And I will say we're very flexible about this. You are required to complete those materials to get the certificate, which is offered as once you complete the class. But we're very flexible about that. We're here to provide whatever support you need. And usually, you don't necessarily have to have it absolutely done by the time the class. I can't remember exactly, but they usually there's some time period during which you could complete those materials. And the stewardship project was a really great aspect of the class. This is one where different students have done all kinds of things between designing a native plant garden, becoming a volunteer. We really encourage you to think about ways in which you can do something active in the stewardship project. You do need to plan to attend all the course sessions, the class and the field trips. We do have some options for makeup. We want to encourage you, if you decide to take the class, to attend every meeting, but there are some options and some flexibility because we realize everybody has different things in their life, and we'll work with you to make it work. There's also a community science project that we'll do as a group. And then there's a textbook, which is included in your registration fee, Climate Stewardship, Taking Collective Action, which is a textbook that was developed for the program by the University of California. Next slide, please. So here's the schedule. We're starting on Saturday, September 26th with our first meeting, which will be an introduction. With these online meetings, we often have guest lecturers, but we also want to make sure that you have a chance to meet and talk with your fellow participants. So we usually use like breakout sessions for discussions and ways to ask questions and have discussions. So it's very informal. If you're in the online class and you need to, step away, that's all fine. We just want to make sure that everybody has a chance to work together, have discussions, not just always just lectures. Our first field trip will be to several locations in the Valley. As I mentioned, we've got some really great options for the field trip. That'll be also a Saturday, and the field trips are generally going to be all day. We start, I think, at 8. Is that right? Start at 8. And usually it'll take us about all day, and we basically kind of carpool for the field trips. On the 10th of October, there will not be a class. There is a statewide conference going on in Santa Barbara for this Environmental Stewards program, and a number of us will be attending that conference. So there would be a day there where you wouldn't have to be in class on Saturday. The next meeting on the 17th will be focused on the science of climate change and also some of the things going on locally with regard to renewable energy. We have a great speaker for that presentation. Our second field trip on the 24th of October is the agricultural, organic farm, traditional farm, some of the things going on in the East Valley with respect to agriculture and ways in which agriculture is looking at dealing with climate issues. And then we have 2 more class meetings on the 31st and the 7th. Community resilience and taking action. We have a really great presentation about how you can talk to people about climate change in a way that helps to, find common ground and help to maybe expose more people to a chance to talk about what's going on with the Earth's climate. Community engagement, environmental justice, and health and climate. This is a really interesting presentation about the differences between the East Valley and the West Valley and different parts of our community with respect to how climate issues, and especially obviously the heat, affect different members of our community, our agricultural workers and others who work in the intensity of the heat. We will also not be having a class on the 14th of November. This is actually a day when the Desert Horticultural Society is hosting their annual Desert Community Garden Day in Rancho Mirage. And also the Native Plant Society has a Desert Native Plant Sale. So we would not be having class because all of us are involved in that event, but we will encourage everyone to attend the Garden Day and the Native Plant Sale. And you'll hear more about that as time goes along. Our third field trip will be up to Joshua Tree in the high desert to take a look at some of the things that are going on up there with regard to restoration, climate resilience, how they're working to try to preserve Joshua trees. And that would be a really cool field trip. And then once again, no class on Thanksgiving. So that week pretty much, we would not have a class on the Saturday following Thanksgiving. And the Wednesday evening office hours would also not be happening since hopefully everybody will be home making pie or whatever on Wednesday evening. So our final 2 classes are the opportunity for you to present your stewardship project. So this would be where each of the folks who takes the course would do a presentation of the project that you've worked on. These are usually pretty short, like 5 or 10 minutes, with a chance for folks to ask questions. But this is a really great part. People come up with some really creative and amazing projects. We've had people, gather native plant foods and make a menu of native plant foods and all kinds of really amazing projects. So both the 5th of December and the 12th will be online, or excuse me, our stewardship projects. We're hoping to have the final meeting in person and have a graduation. We like to hand out the certificates and have a little gathering and some refreshments and all, and celebrate the completion of the course and just really kind of help bring everybody together. So next slide, please. So I mentioned the stewardship project already. We've talked about that. This is one to do some kind of project that relates to climate issues, climate resilience. We definitely encourage team projects, but these are projects that are intended to be something that you feel passionate about, that you'd like to explore and spend time learning more about. Very much focused on some more like action-oriented project. This isn't like a report, but for example, we've had a couple of students who did a presentation and did a lot of research on plant-based diets and did a presentation on ways that we could, as individuals, kind of move in that direction. So there's all kinds of different topics that are, a lot of flexibility. And if you decide to take the course, we'll spend time, helping you to decide and work on what you want to do for your stewardship project. Next slide, please. Yeah. And then this other aspect that I mentioned at the beginning, which is part of the University of California's focus for this course, which is really having people who share a passion or a concern learn about it, and especially develop ways that we can support each other, both socially and emotionally. And with the Climate Stewards class, in addition to this class, which we do in the fall, we, following the class, if you're interested, you can join several of our activities. We have a monthly Zoom meetup where we sometimes have lectures, sometimes have people talking about other past students who talk about things that they've done in the community. We've started doing some field trips, so additional to those that are offered by the class. And those activities are open to anybody who's either taken the Climate Stewards or the California Naturalist class, what we call the Desert Environmental Stewards. So this is a really key part of this program, is to really find, connections. Maybe you'll meet other folks in the community who are interested and concerned and passionate about doing something to help our planet. Next slide, please. That's the last. Oh, okay. Colin, you want to talk about the how to apply part?
Okay, so I'll be dropping the application, which is open now, in the chat as soon as I'm done sharing my screen. But just we talked a little bit about the schedule. The program runs for 12 weeks from the end of September through mid-December. And we've got 3 field trips. So, just be aware of that. There is a cost for the program, which is $350. I'll say we definitely want to work with you. If that sounds like a deal, then great. It actually is less the than UCR Palm Desert was charging the last couple of times they offered the course. So we're really happy about that. But if it sounds like a lot, or if it sounds like it puts the course out of reach for you, we want to work with you on that. So there's scholarship options, payment plans, kind of, whatever we can do to help you take the class and remove any barriers that might prevent you. But within that fee, it does include basically everything you need to take the class, except for your something to sign up or log on to Zoom with, and showing up to the field trips for. You should be aware that in addition to the $350, there's an opportunity. This is a UC course. It actually gives you or it gives you opportunity to have college credit if you complete the class through no additional work, but you have to do like a registration process and pay an additional fee to the University of California, Davis, and they would be the ones that actually grant you the college credit for the class. So if that's something that you're interested in, either for, continuing education or your regular ongoing education for some folks, or as sort of proof of professional development. Those are all, reasons that people go for the college credits, and those are definitely things that you can all do, but that's an additional fee. Just be aware of that. Okay, I think I'm going to stop sharing my screen and drop the application in the chat. I'm also gonna stop recording